discussing Felix Flicker's book, The Magic of Physics. This is not a formal discussion. I already had an episode where I spoke about the approach to science as a language of nature. And I want to expand on this here and formally discuss the book. Flicker is a physics professor, I think, University of Cardiff in the UK. It's a great book. It's a very inspiring book. Now, there's, just to be clear, definitely some peculiarities. I would call them some British peculiarities, like an obsession with wizardry and magic and sort of Lord of the Rings type of feel to the book. So you have to be into this. I'm not. So for me, sometimes it's a little bit off-putting to talk about fairies and magic spells and that kind of stuff. But that's fine. That's really, think of it like watching football and then listening to people with British accents. It's the same game. It just has a little bit of a, local flair, and that's fine. But here's what the book really does to me. First, it inspires people to actually get into the field of physics, and in particular condensed matter physics, which I think is, first and foremost, it's a good thing to do, entice people to study a field within sciences. I think condensed matter physics is an interesting field. It's not necessarily the only one, but I feel in general, people in the field writing popular books to actively recruit other people to study that stuff. That's what I find so amazing. And it's all unfortunately lacking a little bit. Like if you read, people like Sean Carroll and Brian Keating, two of the popular scientists that I follow here in the U.S., they still have that elitist approach. Well, we know stuff you don't know. If you listen to me, you might get smarter, but we're sort of a cabal of very special people and that kind of stuff. And Flicker is really trying to break that spell, pun intended here, with explaining what condensed matter physics really is. Now, so this would be the first point, I think. The second point, I had a bit of an idea, a revelation, an inspiration, and what more can a book do than inspire? So this is testament for the quality of the book. And that is that we can look at science as a language problem, and we can use large language models to model science. And this is really, really subtle and important. Demis Hassabis said recently that he believes that mathematics is the language for classical physics, and that the new type of physics, and particularly also nature and biology, cannot be represented with mathematics, because that language is really, it started back with Galileo, and it's reaching its limits in its usefulness in explaining what's going on in nature. If we use modern approaches in artificial intelligence, we can have more breakthroughs in science. And I think while this is sort of lingering around a lot of scientific conversations, particularly AI conversations. Recently, Peter Abil was talking about this with one of his prodigies, I forgot the name, Dong or something, where he spoke about the ability to use AI to do more research in chemistry and stuff like that. But I think that's fine. That using AI as a tool is a great idea. But here's what I think this book is transpiring to me is it's even deeper, that you can use the representation of language as a foundation to try to understand the magic of reality. This is really profound. I'm going to expand on this. This is not even Wrong podcast. It's June 14, 2023. This is Crim Telco. Since the last update, we're up 13.5%. The market is up 2%. For the year, we're up 119%. The market is up 13%. We're outperforming by 106%. Let me talk quickly about the market and then get into the book. What we had recently is the CPI number, which came out sort of in line. I wouldn't say that we have a fantastic picture on the CPI front, but it's not getting worse. I think from our perspective, the fundamental problem with the CPI is twofold. One is the labor market, the other is the government. As long as the government is spending the kind of money that we're spending, I think we're not going to have much relief on the CPI front. And I think we need a more productive labor market. We've spoken about this many times. For example, work from home is a big drag on productivity, and other type of things like all the diversity stuff. And there's a lot of hurdles being put in front of companies, and a lot of from our perspective, a lot of unnecessary hindrance for employees to be hired and so on and so forth. We believe that AI will break that mold, that AI will make it a lot more productive and also a lot more competitive on the labor front. But that could take some time. Nevertheless, those are the two big problems. So we don't see much of a relief on the CPI front. We also see that in the interest rate environment. The interest rate environment is still relatively high. However, given the massive investment cycle that we're now seeing in AI, and what we mean with AI is in particular the large language models, the transformers that are enabling new types of applications, that investment cycle is going to dwarf even the macro headwinds that we're facing. Now, this is a big statement, and the reason this statement is so important is really because in investing, you really have to understand one thing. I think, as you know, the purpose of this podcast series is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So we're definitely in a situation right now, a very important situation where you have to understand as a fund manager that the macro risks, which are real, are going to be overwhelmed by the massive investment cycle. When you have these types of cycles, when people collectively decide to put resources to work for productive investments such as AI, you will have growth, you will have wealth creation. And this is what we're going through right now. This is why the market is rallying for good reasons. How far is it going to go? Are we going to have a bubble? What are the repercussions? Those are conversations we're going to have in the near future. But just remember, there were bubbles before, the railway bubble, the computer bubble, the internet bubble, blah, blah, blah. There has been so many bubbles. Every time this happened, the two things were for sure. One is it went up and then it came back down, crashed, but then there was an underlying force that kept going and drove wealth creation. And that's why we're so optimistic and very positive about the productive future that AI it will bring to the table. Now let's talk about Felix Flicker's book. Okay, so there's really two things I want to emphasize here. First, just the sheer importance of trying to understand what is it that physics and science in particular are doing. Condensed matter physics is the study of matter. Matter is the electrodynamic relationships between atoms and between the particles within the atoms and how they influence matter, which is stuff that has mass and volume and takes space. In a more technical explanation, Flicker talks about matter being anything that breaks symmetry and has rigidity. Now, I don't know what that exactly means, and it's not important, but think of it this way. Okay, we have stuff that is in front of us, metal, stone, nature, plants, human flesh, anything that you can, what we consider as matter in vernacular is really in physics something that has some sort of periodicity. It is rigid and it breaks symmetry in the sense that you can't go one way in infinity and backwards in infinity. There's a bump in that certain timeline, and that bump is the matter itself. But let's not talk about the symmetry stuff. Let's just talk about general ideas that condensed matter physics is coming up with. For example, lithium-ion batteries. That's condensed matter physics, pure and simple. It is how do we combine stuff, atoms, and molecules, and then sort of create macro effects. For example, we can store electrons and pull energy and store energy. This is one of the big applications. Superconductors and superfluids are, I would say, the next frontier. We have spoken about superconductors in the past. I think quantum computing and superconductors are two of the fields that we believe will generate lots of interest at some point. These are, sciences that are on the brink of being useful. And that's one of the things that Flicker really is coming across within this book, which is that you have two types of science. You have the science which is the poetry, and then you have the science which is the narrative. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? The same way that we have poetry and narratives. For example, we have poetry written by Johann Wolfgang Goethe, or I grew up in the German-speaking world, so I'm familiar with those types of poems, Rilke, and so on and so forth. Now, poetry is maybe not the most useful tool for language to be, to convey stuff, right? So what we have is narratives, vernacular, stuff that helps us writing, for example, reports, writing articles, writing, scientific articles, that kind of stuff. So that's more useful. And the same way science has the poetry, maybe things that we would consider theoretical physics or, abstract stuff, string theory and those sort of things, quantum computational theory, that kind of stuff is a little bit more removed from reality in the sense that we can't use it right away and make stuff with it, but we can use the poetry or the ideas from that type of science then to make useful things, and then we go to the realm of engineering. Now, the difference between engineering and science, as far as I'm concerned, is the following. Science is also making stuff. You can't do science without making stuff. You can call it theoretical versus experimental, I don't care, but anybody who does science has to end up making stuff. The difference between engineering and science is simply that engineers, they care about scale and cost. That's the difference, right? So you have people doing stuff in the lab, for example, creating a superconductor at room temperature. That's an endeavor that scientists are actively pursuing. However, creating superconductors that can be used for practical purposes in the grid or in creating electric motors, that's an engineering problem, because no matter what, we have to take into consideration scalability and cost. Now, I don't want to go much deeper into that because that is a whole podcast on its own, but I just want to bring that home because for people who are interested in studying science, I think this book is crucial because it helps you understand. First, it democratizes the access to knowledge in this field. You don't have to be a wizard. You don't have to be a genius. Flicker says everybody can't be a wizard. All you have to do is learn the tricks. If you put in the effort and learn the tricks, you will become a wizard. The same way, if you put in the effort, you can become a very good goalkeeper or a ballet dancer or a swimmer. You might not be Michael Phelps or Baryshnikov or Courtois, but you can be really good at stuff if you just put in the work. And the same applies to physics, and in particular, condensed matter physics. Why is condensed matter physics so interesting? Because it has a lot of applications. And that's just the nature of things, because whatever we do as humans, at least for now, we still spend a lot of time transforming matter. This is what economic activity is today. It might change in the future where we have transformation of bits or qubits, in other words, virtual reality. But right now we're in the physical realm because that's what we're mostly occupied with as humans. It's matter. Okay, I want to fly from San Francisco to Robbie to visit my parents. That's a problem of space and time. It requires acceleration, momentum, volume, space. That's matter. And it transcends itself. It transcends into airplanes and engines and noise and energy and all that kind of stuff. So that's matter that needs to be transformed. Wealth is the set of possible transformations. I'm quoting David Deutsch. And most of these transformations are in today's realm happening in the matter world. Again, this could change. I'm absolutely up for it, which is another interesting idea from this book. However, right now we're focused on that the same way I think humanity has been focused on matter ever since humanity exists. I mean, this idea of virtual reality is really sort of a new thing. It's coming and it's going to be interesting, but I don't want to spend more time in this particular episode on this. Let's focus on matter. So transforming matter is what economic activity is all about, and condensed matter physics is the study of the language of atoms and subparticles that interact with electromagnetic forces, and trying to understand this language is really what physics is all about, and then use this language for more useful narratives. That would be what engineering is all about. So this is the first thing. Again, I've spoken about this already in my first episode at the preliminary discussion of the book. I just wanted to bring this home. Now, the big takeaway, I think, the second point I want to make today is that we have a new representation of science, which is representing nature in form of language. This is, I think, is the big breakthrough that this book is helping me formulate. So what do I mean by that? Well, the same way, if we take a large language model, what is a large language model? It is taking language, actually English language, literally language, and is trying to understand all the, attention, self-attention, basically the relationships between tokens. Those could be words or parts of words, and that's a whole different science, of course. What is a token? But let's just keep it simple. Let's say we have words in the English language, and they sort of have relationships with each other, and transformers learn those relationships, and then we can use that learning, which that's what a transformer is, generalized pre-trained transformer, GPT, and then we can do other types of learning on top of it, one-shot learning, reinforcement learning, whatnot, and do things like, for example, create chatbots and other things. Now, here's the thing. Is this going to end the chatbots? No. The chatbots are just sort of the first application. There's a lot more you can do with language models. You can represent pretty much anything in form of language. Now, when I say language, I don't necessarily mean English here. I mean language could be, the dynamics, like electromagnetic forces between atoms, could be tokenized. Spins of electrons, like what we can decide what to tokenize. Let's say we take all the body of knowledge of physics that we have today, and we tokenize it, and then run an LLM on it, and see where we get. And we might get a GPT that helps us represent nature and learn from nature much faster than we were able today. This is the really, really big idea. I can't emphasize this enough. I just spoke with my son, who is now applying for colleges, and we spoke about what kind of major he wants, and that's a whole different conversation again. But I would say that my son's major will hopefully be in science, hopefully physics, and that physics major has to consist of science, understanding physics, the knowledge of physics. It has to be linguistics, and it has to be computer science. This is the big breakthrough here, that the physics major of the future, even undergrad, and definitely anything above undergrad, will consist of those three fields. Why? Because I believe that language and the representation of nature in language space is going to be a lot more useful than representing nature in mathematics space. This is the key. Galileo Galilei has sort of revolutionized science in the Renaissance by helping us understand nature through mathematics. It has definitely had some huge impact on classical physics, culminating in the Principia Mathematica by Newton. But of course, as we all know today, that kind of knowledge has its limits. We can't explain what's going on in the smallest and in the largest. Einstein in 1905 told us this in a couple of papers, and today we have quantum physics, astrophysics, relativity. We have fields that deal with these problems. We haven't really solved them by any means, but we're making progress. Understanding superconductivity, understanding superfluidity, understanding quantum computing, all those things are within the realm of the so far not explainable situation in the micro space. So what happens when electrons interact? By the way, are there electrons, or maybe there's only one electron that we consider being several electrons? In Flicker's book, there's the idea of the fabric, the interwoven, sort of the knot makers and the weavers that create what we call the universe, and it's an interwoven net of relationships between let's call it tokens. Uh, that would explain things like entanglement, where you have something which is interwoven, and therefore you have this spooky action at a distance, because if I change something here, I will automatically change something there. That kind of stuff. I think we're going into that direction. Again, this idea of the fabric of reality. David Deutsch already used that in his book I think written in the 90s. So there's definitely this type of approach towards reality, which is different than what mathematics is offering us today. Now, of course, mathematics has its tools also, topology being one of them, where we try to talk about relationships and topological factors that could influence our understanding of nature. But I believe that using language as a basis, for understanding nature, it is going to be much more fruitful because of the idea of large language models. So to summarize, Felix Flicker, The Magic of Physics is an inspirational book because it helps us democratize the access to physics, in particular condensed matter physics. Flicker makes the case that condensed matter physics is an interesting field because it deals with matter, and transformation of matter is actually at the forefront of economic activity, and therefore a useful science for not just generating knowledge, but also for practical use. He's then also making the case that language is the basis of understanding nature. In other words, physics is actually tasked with deciphering the language of nature, and it's kind of like poetry, where you have sort of poetic understanding of the world, and then you can use that poetry or that language for more practical purposes. That's what we call engineering. I think most importantly, the takeaway for us is also that large language models and the representation of language in general are better ways to try to understand nature, to represent nature, and then use that understanding also to transform nature. In other words, large language models, the representation of reality in form of language, in our point of view, is actually the new form of science, and science in the future will consist of traditional science, knowledge, linguistics, and computer science. Another way to think about it is, think of a prompt engineer today, right? It's a big deal, prompt engineering. You have a transformer, and then you use prompts to make the transformer better, to help you predict better solutions to a problem. And that could be the science of the future. We have a transformer that is trained on the language of condensed matter physics, and then you prompt it, can you help me create a better battery? I want to have a battery that charges faster and releases energy faster, but doesn't degrade as it has many cycles. And then you can sort of work with the bot and develop the knowledge that's necessary to create that kind of battery. So that's the actual practical application. So you have a prompt engineer, which is the engineer of the future. So it's prompting an AI which is trained on a large language model. Just instead of English, we use the language of nature. Thank you.